Hey, 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 it's the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm joined here by the Comics Cat, who may decide to leave at some point during the filming, so that's okay. I want to talk to you about the pilot episode of the animated series Cubix. This episode was titled The Unfixable Robot. This is a world set sometime in the future where robots exist alongside humans, and it's not really made clear what exactly the purpose of these robots are. In some cases, we see robots performing jobs that, in the real world, humans would be doing. Cutting bushes and doing construction work, things like that. Most of the robots we see, as far as I can tell, they don't have any purpose at all. We're not ever told in this episode who built the robots, although with as many as there are in this episode, I can only assume it happened many years before this episode takes place. This episode centers around the city of Bubbletown, and we follow a young boy and his father as they move to Bubbletown. We don't actually know why they're moving to Bubbletown, although we later see that Connor, that's the boy, his father is opening up a restaurant of some kind. So I guess he just saw a job opportunity there. We don't know why, but for some reason Connor's father hates robots. Maybe we find out later in the series, but in this episode, all we really know is that he is seemingly the only person in town who hates robots. Everyone else we see in this episode seems to love robots in one way or another. And that includes our protagonist, Connor. We really don't know anything about Connor at all over the course of this episode. All we know is that he loves robots, and he knows the name of every type of robot that he sees. This is a problem for me in watching this episode, or really anything at all. If I don't know anything about the protagonist, then I find it's hard for me to get engaged in the episode. The more I know about a character, the more likely it is that I'm going to follow them for a long period of time as I watch their adventures. And unfortunately, in this episode, I really don't know anything about any of the characters. Connor, all I know is that he's a teenage boy and that he likes robots. The bad guy, Dr. K, all we know about him is that he's your very, very typical mad scientist, and he's after some kind of substance called Solex. Other than that, he doesn't really have a personality beyond cackling, mad, evil genius. Maybe he's not even a genius, we don't know. This substance is called Solex, and it drives two robots crazy. I don't really know where this substance comes from, what it is, why Dr. K wants it, or how it causes these robots to go crazy. In both instances, we see a robot who's seemingly perfectly normal, they're doing a job, and then, out of nowhere, they go crazy. Now, I don't mind, in a fictional world, creating fictional substances, fictional laws of reality, as long as you follow through with those laws and create reasonable reasons why they exist. For example, in the world of Superman, if you have a substance called kryptonite that harms Superman, I don't care that you've made this substance up or that it really doesn't make any sense at all why a piece of his homeworld would hurt him. These things do not bother me as long as you are consistent in how they hurt Superman. If you go in one instant of a little tiny slither of it almost killing him to the next instant where he's able to lift a mountain of it, then you kind of have a problem because it's inconsistent. And while I'm not saying that the use of Solex in this episode is inconsistent, I definitely feel like it has the potential to be later on. We don't know anything about it, and because of that, I feel like the creators of this show feel like they can get away with making it into anything they want. But if they don't know what it is, then by the time they actually get around to explaining what it is, I feel like they're going to have several plot problems on their hands when they go back and you realize, oh, okay, their explanation of what Solex is, why Dr. K wants it, and how it gets into the robots doesn't actually fit into any of the pieces of the puzzle that we've seen leading up to this explanation. In a fictional world, depending on how much it differs from the real world, you need to have a reason that things are happening and why things are the way they are. So if you have an entire town where there are maybe more robots than there are human beings, we need to have certain things worked out. We see robots who are doing construction work. Okay, does that mean that there are human beings in this town who are now jobless because a robot can better do his job? In theory, this would be something you would see explored in a science fiction movie or a television show, but in this piece of entertainment for children, I guess the creators felt like they really didn't have to explore interesting things, like why each robot exists, or how this would affect the economy, things like that. So, we don't get any introduction of things like that at all in this episode. And ultimately, we don't ever get to see exactly what the relationship is between robots and humans. In the theme song, there's even a little portion of it where it says, "Robots for everyone." So does that mean that human beings own robots? It certainly seems that way. There's one girl who lives next door to Connor, and she has a robot that, if I had to classify it as something, I would say it's a pet. But then you have other things like the construction robot, or the one that was doing the gardening, and they seem to be workers who don't really belong to anybody. When Connor meets some of the supporting cast in this series, they seem very surprised that he doesn't even own a robot, implying that most people in this town do own robots. And yet, in the theme song and in the episode, they mention that every robot has an emotion chip. Okay, if you are going to create a slave race of creatures, in this case robots, that are stronger than you and could in theory replace you, since we see them doing jobs that originally human beings did, then why would you give them an emotion chip, especially if you are turning them into your slaves? Now, it could be that the relationship between robots and humans is just peachy, and I'm just reading too much into this. After all, this is mostly meant for little children who aren't going to be thinking too much about this sort of thing. Since I am not a little child, I am forced to actually use my brain and think about this episode. I have to wonder, who said that they should put emotion chips in every robot? What is the purpose of doing this? We've seen this happen before in television shows like Star Trek: The Next Generation. From what we know about Data's creator, we know that it makes sense for him to put an emotion chip in his creation data. We don't see, say, the ship's computer have a personality, because that really wouldn't make any sense at all. Nor does it really make any sense that every robot in this town, or even any of them, would have a personality and emotions and things like that, because, well, why? We still don't know what the purpose of every robot in this city is. I already mentioned the construction robot that went crazy, and then there was the gardening robot. But then there's the girl. She has a robot that, as far as I can tell, doesn't do anything at all. And it acts a lot like a little 4-year-old might. But then, when the gardening robot goes crazy, we see some robots who are acting like men in their 30s who want some action. Who is it that creates these robots, and why are they creating vastly different emotional ages for these robots? Speaking of things that don't make sense, boy, this episode has a lot of them. Like how every robot in this city, or maybe even in this entire world, their name or their model number, whatever it is, seems to end in the suffix of "ix." For example, the main robot, his name is Cubix. And then you might have a robot who does welding jobs, and his name might be Weldix. Now, I guess this is trying to cash in on things like Digimon or whatever, where every creature has the word Mon at the end of its name. There, it kind of made sense, because Digimon was a contraction of two words, digital monsters. Here, Cubix, there is no reason for him to be called that. There's no reason for any robot in this entire world to have Ix attached to whatever it does. If it's a welding robot, then just call it that. It welds and it's a robot. I don't really understand Ix other than, well, that's what another cartoon does, so we'll do it, except that we have no rationale to do that. I imagine if I was going to keep watching this series, many of the scenes would take place at Hella's garage where she fixes robots. Hella, as near as I can tell, is maybe old enough to be Connor's mom, maybe a little younger. And as we see in this episode, there are 2 boys and a girl who also work for Hella. I don't really understand why they work for Hella. It seems like fixing robots is something that adults would do, because we see the little girl, she's studying for this career path, and there are many intricacies to this type of career. Kind of like if a nurse was going to study the human body. That's kind of how I'm reading it anyway. And yet, here we see that 4 children are perfectly capable of fixing robots just as much as Hella is. Okay, what's up with that? Granted, the 3 who are already working for Hella, the girl and the 2 boys, we don't know how competent they are, although we find out that all 3 of them were able to fix one robot by themselves in less than 24 hours. So presumably they're at least decent at it. But then we see that Connor is some sort of prodigy in fixing robots. We've already talked about how his father hates robots for seemingly no reason at all. So where did Connor get all of the experience in fixing robots? They don't have any robots when they move to town. Where did he do all of this practice? And why is it that he is more accomplished at this career than the grown woman who does this for a living? Why are there 4 children working at this place where presumably adults would be working? That would be like if I walked into, I don't know, a mechanic shop and a 13-year-old said, okay, I'm going to change the oil and then I'm going to change the tires. I mean, I guess maybe it would work if there were no adults of the age of 18 and up, but that's not what's going on here. We have kids who, for no reason at all, are working at this place, if only because it makes it more convenient for the writers when they're going to set many of their scenes here. You know, how every show will have some sort of central place where most of their scenes take place. I assume that's what this garage is going to be. That's really all I have to say about this episode. If you've ever seen this series, maybe you enjoyed it, but I'm going to have to say, if you haven't seen this series, don't bother seeking it out. It's really not worth your time. It's basically aimed at little children who are younger than teenagers, and if you don't mind your children watching something that's just really dumb, that doesn't feel like it's been thought out at all, then by all means, let your child watch this. Or if you are a child who doesn't mind watching things that are really dumb and not thought out at all, then by all means, watch this. If you want your children to watch educational things that are entertaining but are also smart and can be enjoyed at any age group, then by all means, do not watch this, or do not let anyone watch this. It basically feels like it's trying to be like other animated shows, but in creating this premise, it really doesn't work at all. Many things just feel forced or seem like they exist for no real reason at all. I hope you enjoyed this episode of another review from the Comics Kid 2099. I plan to do reviews of other animated episodes from other television shows. I do plan to return to Young Justice, at least temporarily, until I get tired of watching it. And sadly, I will not be reviewing any more Cubix because, well, I really didn't enjoy this experience. So, until next time, I just wanted to tell you to sleep well, and most likely I'll kill you in the morning. I'll see you next time.